You're listening to Go with Jamarlin Martin. We have a go hard or go home approach as we talk to the leading tech leaders, politicians, and influencers. Let's go. We have a special guest today, Delane Parnell. How's it going, Delane?
Yeah, everything's good, man. Just, one day at a time, moving forward.
Yeah, so Go is still in LA. We're at the beautiful office space of Delane's and his movement that he has going on. He has a very, very cracking in LA and a lot of momentum. Before we get into your momentum as a founder, give us the short story of, how you grew up and kind of the path to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I grew up in Detroit in the Jeffries Projects, raised by a single mother, myself and my older brother. Both of our fathers passed away. My brother's father passed away from sickle cell. My father was murdered a few months before I was born. So it was really, for me at least, I was raised by sort of a friend of the family. My brother was raised by my grandparents because, my mom, she was 23 years old, two children, both of their fathers deceased, sort of, she was just going through her struggle of figuring it out. And, eventually moved back in with my mom as I got older, and she was just more stable and sort of ready to take on that responsibility. And yeah, she sort of introduced me to entrepreneurship. And that came about from helping me get a summer job. And her premise was, keep my boys off of the streets because we lived in a pretty gang-infested neighborhood. And so my brother worked at a meat packing place, like a store. I worked at a cell phone store. And from that moment, I've been, fascinated by business and in business since. So.
And you own your own cell phone company.
So not initially. I started off initially just, working at a cell phone store, and it actually started off like holding a sign. So I was like 13 years old going into my first year of high school, and I was holding a sign at this cell phone store. It was a wireless giant. We sold Sprint and Nextel phones just outside of Detroit. And it was actually like the most embarrassing job I've ever had. It's the only, I would say, embarrassing job I've ever had. Imagine holding a sign and dancing, and I can't dance actually, so I was just had movement. And eventually, the guy who owns the store, his name is Wassam, but we call him Sam. He took me in, taught me how to sell phones. And as his business grew, my role and responsibility within the store grew. And a lot of it was just because of my dedication and commitment. I would go to school, and literally right after school, I would take a bus. The bus driver would get me as close as he could to the store, and I'd walk a half a mile. Depending on the store, he had multiple stores at some point, so a half a mile to a mile until I had a car. And just work every day until closing. And when I didn't have school, I would work, start to close.
Your motivation at that point, was it more of, hey, I'm young and my pockets are getting fat, or was it, hey, I love doing this? Like how much on, each side?
So I think it was probably a combination of both, right? So it's like, one, I really love doing this. I love having control, having influence, learning. And then also I was like, I want to get rich. Like I want to get my family out of this situation and be able to contribute. And so like working, gave me means to be able to take care of myself, help support our household. And also for me, the one of the other drivers was just saving for college. And so, yeah.
You lost your dad early on. You want to talk about that?
I mean, it's not much to talk about actually, right? Because he was murdered before I was born. So we didn't really have a rapport. Or were able to even, meet each other. And so I do have a stepfather. His name is Jerry. He's basically like my dad, and he's amazing. So
how do you get to starting your own esports company?
Yeah, well, I like to say it was a short journey, but it wasn't. So it really started. So, was able to, purchase 3 cell phone stores with some partners when I was 16 in Detroit. Fast forward maybe a year and a half later, my mom introduced me to this guy named Mark. He owned a collision shop, wanted to get into the car rental business as it was like beneficial to customer acquisition in his business, owning the collision shop. So helped him start a car rental, which now has 16 locations in South East Detroit, called Executive Car Rental. and it didn't have 16 locations. Initially, it was just one, and it was just Mark and myself, and we were sort of hustling, figuring it out. And eventually, the company started to grow, and we started to get a lot more customers, and the brand within the city started to grow. Sort of halfway, like through the initial growth phase, I sort of left. So we had maybe 4 locations. It was a few years in. Left as the company was just professionalizing, right? And we were getting a CEO, and responsibilities were changing, and I just felt it was time for me to sort of depart and go do my own thing. Plus, around that time, I became super fascinated with just tech and startups, mostly inspired by the story of Groupon. There it was like they were using software to help brick and mortar businesses, which is what I was mostly accustomed to, acquire customers. And I was just blown away, right? Because I grew up in a household where we didn't use computers, we didn't have internet, and to learn about this stuff and learn that people were making money through
Was
the
it
internet.
the business story, or were you actually using Groupon?
No, we weren't using it.
Okay.
No, it's just like, wow, like people are going online with, buying stuff with people that they don't know to drive a price down. And then that's actually, transacting into like, real dollars for small businesses. And so I was just fascinated by it. And I'd also noticed a bunch of flaws, right, in the Groupon model, like for business owners, like their margins were swallowed by Groupon. There wasn't a lot of loyalty within that customer base. And I come up with this idea to build a competitor that was like a self-service subscription model called Plenty Discounts. It never got off the ground. I never really pursued it, but I spent so much time researching and putting, plans together. And throughout that process of even that ideation process, I, learned how to do financial models. I learned how to, do wireframes and really think about the user journey and stuff like that. As I was doing that, I learned the engineering process, right, and Scrum and all of these things. And so, it was dope. And so I'm really grateful for that experience. That also led me to just a realization that Detroit didn't have a tech scene. And so one of the things that, like, this is prior to Dan Gilbert purchasing any buildings in the city, and so or any venture funds sprouting up or anything like that. And so what I did was I had a few friends who were in the tech, and we started hosting these events. Initially they started off as 50 founders, but we changed the name. So the whole concept was like my favorite 50 founders we would bring over some period of time to Detroit to speak to an audience of entrepreneurs, right? Yeah. And over time, we changed the name to Starter Talks, but we were able to bring people like Alexis Ohanian, who started Reddit, Charles Adler, who started Kickstarter, Mitch Kapoor, from Oakland, Brad Feld, David Cohen, all of these, amazing entrepreneurs and investors, some even before they really like took off to Detroit to speak. And, the audience grew from 30, I think was the first event, to 1,500 people. And it was just like a really amazing experience. And, Dan started purchasing buildings, and we started doing a bunch of work with him. And eventually end up getting a job as a senior associate at a venture fund called Inkwell with Tom Lasorda, the former CEO of Chrysler. And that's really where things started to really take a turn for me as just a career. And that role even came about. It was pretty interesting. I was talking to a bunch of, like, in Detroit, so like hosting these events in Detroit allowed me to, just bridge the gap between like Detroit and the suburbs, Detroit and Ann Arbor, all of these other sort of tech communities that, like, even small, but like that existed. And people, and also like Detroit and like the coast, right? Like I was bringing people from San Francisco, from New York, from Chicago, all of these different major cities who had, tech hubs that were just more established. And no one really had connections like that in Detroit. Not even some of Dan Gilbert's people, which was, crazy to me. And so everyone sort of looked at me like, what's going on, in Silicon Valley? What's going on here? Could you introduce me to this person? Stuff like that. And so I became this sort of resource, this support system for entrepreneurs in Detroit. And I wanted to monetize that, and the events were great. Like we were making money from doing the events, but the way to do that full time was like to be able to support entrepreneurs in some capacity, and like being a VC was the sort of ideal route to do so, for me at least. And so I was talking to a bunch of firms sort of all over, but I wanted to stay in Detroit. I was pretty committed to the Detroit startup scene. And there was only 2 funds. There was Detroit Venture Partners with Dan Gilbert and his guys, and then there was Tom Lasorda over at Inkwell. And Tom he'd done a fund like a year prior, like a 10 million fund. It didn't really go so well. Yeah. And I love the way that he approached me about it. Was like, hey, we had this fund. It didn't really go so well, but we're really excited. we've been talking to people about who just knows a lot about startups, and we want someone who can come in and contribute, right? Like we're a small team, 4 people, and you can come in, make decisions, lead deals, and along the way, like there's a bunch of us partners or like GPs, LPs in the fund who have made a lot of money elsewhere and have a lot of experience in other markets, and like we're totally down to help you learn about those, right? As much as you're interested in, and that was exciting to me. And plus to be able to sort of rub shoulders, right? Like I'm 20 years old, rub shoulders with guys who were billionaires like Roger Penske and Dieter Zetsche, the chairman of Mercedes-Benz. Like that was like, it was like the go, right? Yeah. It's like, how did you make your money? Tell me how.
I want to share with you a great company called TopTal. That's TOPTAL. This is a company that I use if you're in the market for a freelancer, whether it's an engineer or a designer. This is one of the leading companies that's going to help you identify and hire top freelancing talent. You can go to moguldom.com/TopTal. You click on that link and register, and someone will get right back to you to get more information. Be sure to check out TopTal.
And so took that role, and it was great. The first few months were great, but it was an uphill battle because these guys were obviously very wealthy guys. They were really protective of their personal assets. And so they make, entrepreneurs sign NDAs or like ask for even really like bad terms within their deals, like redemption clauses where you have to give them their money back at whatever value the company is at some point, like some triggered event that they could opt into.
Kind of like a Detroit flavor on VC terms.
Oh man, it wasn't even Detroit flavor. It was just bad. It was terrible.
But I'm just saying, like, it sounds like they're deviating from the consensus in terms of what the market.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, right? And we had a bunch of conversations about that stuff, and they were most of the times, reactive to those conversations in a very positive way. But some stuff didn't really change. Like they wanted entrepreneurs to apply through some sort of portal that had these terms and conditions around privacy and all sorts of just weird stuff. And entrepreneurs, like the best ones, like they don't want to have to like sit there and apply in this like 10-minute sort of form to send you their deck for you to evaluate the business. And so, we while we saw a lot of great companies, right, we also lost a lot of great ones just because they didn't want to go through the funnel. And I remember one of the first companies that made me sort of stand up for entrepreneurs in that regard was the guys behind Managed by Q. They were raising like a $750 million, I forget what the number ended up being, but like $750 or $1 million round. And it was one of their early rounds. And I was like, man, I'm so fascinated about this company. I want to talk to these guys. And I sent them a message and they respond, and we're like in some conversation. And they're like, look, I'm not doing this whole portal thing. Like while I like you, I'm not doing this. And I was like, that I'd heard that feedback so often from entrepreneurs. I sort of, went to the firm, to the partners, and was like, look, we can't do this. We have to change that. And, I think I was rocking the boat too much. Like they weren't really happy with that. And I also fight for entrepreneurs for anything, right? Like entrepreneurs who we have fly in on their own dime. And then, we tell them no. Like, and it's like, we were a yes before they came in, and as soon as they get here, like now we're no, and nothing's changed about the business, but it's just something that, one partner doesn't like, because their process was that they have these pitch meetings and they invite a bunch of their LPs to the pitch meetings because all of these guys were like friends and individuals, and every person had to agree on a startup for that startup to actually get an investment. And you can't, like, there's no consensus on that, right? It's like, it's hard to get consensus when there's 12 people sitting at one table to make one decision, like,
with the
like
veto power kind of mechanism.
Yeah, it's like you have 12 people at one table and you need every single person to agree that we need to make this deal. And so people would bring up all sorts of reasons on why they didn't want to do the deal. And a lot of it was that they weren't close to the business, right? Because the 4 of us at the fund had spent the most time communicating with these startups, and we understood the business. And so you're here for a 30-minute, 1-hour meeting, and now you like have all of this in-depth knowledge on like the business, which you don't.
Give us a kind of a frivolous reason where one partner would just say, I don't like this about this guy.
It could be anything, right? Yeah. Like I remember Rodney Williams, we were talking to him about Listener, and like one of the partners didn't like that his assistant booked the meeting, and they were like, nah, this is like, I don't like this, right? And it was just like, it was a no just because of that.
I pitched to a $1 billion private equity fund before, and the feedback was one of the two members didn't like how my lawyer looked.
It's insane, right?
Yeah.
We brought, I brought so many great companies to the table. Cruise, which we'd even, sold for $1 billion to GM. We negotiated an advisory on that company that would have returned our fund 4 or 5x alone. And one of the partners said, "Oh, this will never commercialize." And my argument was like, someone will buy it for just R&D purposes, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, "Look, I ran a car company, so I know best." And it's hard to argue with that, but at the same time, I'm like, man, you're just not connected right now to what's going on in the markets. And so, we lost that company. There was a lot of other companies that we lost. And I think back, like my career, had we done those deals and I was able to lead those through, like, next year I would have had, or the next couple years, I would have had, 2 or 3 companies going to hit $1 billion in valuation. Maybe I'm not sitting here today talking to you about a company that I started, but like a fund that I raised, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it was the crazy part about that entire story was like that I just cared a lot. One, about entrepreneurs, about venture. It was like, that's my entire dream, was
You
to
wanted
be a
to get on
career
the
VC.
other side.
Yeah, I never really wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was something that I was sort of like, I thought I had the spirit for. But I always wanted to support entrepreneurs because I could like empathize with them.
Yeah, but this helps you kind of be a Deion Sanders in terms of, hey, you have been in on the VC side and you switch up. You have kind of both of those skill sets.
Yeah.
You've had a good look at the VC side as well.
Yeah, sure. It's been helpful, and a lot of those skills I was able to leverage and use to raise our round for our company today. But in general, like I felt like I'd done so much great work there, and it didn't pan out, right? And so anyway, I left that company, I left that fund, joined a startup called Rocket Fiber that was forming within like Dan Gilbert's family of companies, and it's led by this guy named Mark Hudson, and they were building gigabit ISP, so like Google Fiber for other markets, but also residential and commercial real estate for commercial properties. And no one really understood like how to build an ISP. Certainly not me, and today I still really don't understand how. But it was a small team. There are 3 founders, and Mark. When I made the decision that I was going to leave the fund, it was like to go to another fund. And if I did so, it would have been, out of Detroit, or to go work on, the startup side. But it had to be a founder that I really believed in. And Mark Hudson, I think, is like truly probably the most underappreciated CEO, certainly in Detroit, maybe in the country. And I know there's a lot of great CEOs, but this guy, he just gets it. Like he's an engineer by trade. And so he can engineer himself, but he can also speak to engineers across a bunch of disciplines extremely well, and he just gets their plight. And then he's also has like this incredible, like he's just a good design thinker. Like he understands design, he understands, user experience, but he's also like a really strong business guy. He's like the perfect trifecta. Like you don't get this in economics, finance guy. Like you don't get that sort of, you can find people who sort of embody all 3 of those things, which makes him really perfect. And beyond that, like he like I just said, I cared about venture. Like I think he just cares about everything. When he's passionate about something, he like dives into it, he immerses himself fully, and he cares about his customers, he cares about his team, and he just goes the extra mile. And so, I know him because one of my closest friends, that's her boyfriend. And so when I talked to him about this idea, and he was very transparent with me on like, here's the challenges that we face, and like, here's sort of what I'm thinking about, and I don't know how we're going to overcome some of these things, but like, I'd like you to be a part of the journey. I thought it was genuine, and, I wanted to help him get to his goal, because, when you join a startup, like the most important thing is like, do you believe in the person leading it? And I would have given him my kidney if it meant he could get to the next milestone. And I think it's just a phenomenal CEO. And so I had an opportunity in person too, beyond CEO. And so I had an opportunity to go and work with him on strategy. And I worked directly with him, and was just me and him for a while. And then another guy, DeAndre Ely, who now works at Disney, he joined the team, and we worked with Mark together. And that company went from a handful of people to 50, 60 people in the first year. We raised $31 million. We moved into an office. Like we built an office and moved into it. Built the fiber lines and then deployed them. And it was crazy. Like, it was like I got a chance to like witness a startup like extreme growth, right? Like in 1 year, so many new things happening, so many new faces coming in, and also, things that went really well and then things that went terribly well, like, not well. And a lot of those things were like cultural things, making the bad choices in hiring and like leadership positions. Even like business decisions on like, units or product lines to focus on that just were too much in investment that didn't pan out.
So you're getting a great education on kind of what not to do, what could go wrong,
what to do and what not to do. Both.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Mark and his partners, Randy and Eddie, they did a lot of things right.
Yeah.
But there were some things that they did wrong. And it's funny, I just had a conversation with Mark maybe a month ago now. And it's funny, some of the things that, we were doing wrong, they cut off and like they made changes to, and like it's benefited them, and others they didn't, and they went down a rabbit hole and they lost millions of dollars on it. But they learned from them, and they're better leaders because
Not
of it.
unusual for a startup. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a little bit easier when you have 31 million in the bank, though.
yeah.
Right.
Let's fast forward to your current company. How do you get the idea to start it?
So Rocket Fiber was actually really important for me beyond, being able to work with an incredible leader. I think without that experience with Mark, I wouldn't have been prepared to ever be a CEO. And so being able to work directly with him and be a part of that journey sort of got me here, beyond just my direct experience from him, being able to work with a CEO, but also because that's where I sort of dove heavy into esports. And so Dan was looking at doing investments in esports, and also Rocket Fiber had this incredible internet infrastructure in which a lot of the online competitions for esports were held, online, and so people were reaching out to use our internets, right? Like tournament organizers, teams, just all sorts of people within the ecosystem, and so no one was. Me and Mark were like the only gamers, and obviously Mark is the CEO of this company. He doesn't have time to sort of evaluate this opportunity, and so I was sort of deemed the person who should be looking at opportunities for Rocket Fiber and for Dan Gilbert to get into esports, pre Blake Robbins, who does that now, and so I did so, and so I was meeting with everyone, I was talking to everyone. We would fly people in, have conversations with them. We put a few ideas together to try to start companies in this space with support from Dan, but they didn't get through, and it wasn't Dan's fault. It was more so like the people we were trying to organize these opportunities with. But either way, I was sort of heads over heels in the space, and Mark Hudson, we call him Hudson. He gave me freedom to sort of explore that, even when I was working at Rocket Fiber, along with my core responsibilities there, and was able to start an esports team called Rush Esports. We sold it to Team SoloMid, which is the largest esports organization in the world. It wasn't like a massive sale. Frankly, it was sort of before its time in team ownership. What I realized there is that like being a team owner of an esports team, at least at that time, it's a lot more professional now. It was like underappreciated babysitting, right? Like having to break up arguments between guys for whatever reason, having to literally drive to people's house to wake them up to scrim and practice with their teammates. It was like, I can't do this, and like we were lucky enough to find a buyer for the team. From there, went to go start a betting company in esports, so like head-to-head skill betting. So me and you play each other, our teams play each other, and we both put money on the line. And you could also play in tournaments where you enter with some sort of buy-in and win a larger prize. And we built a really phenomenal product. We had some great traction initially, but that market really collapsed, and we raised money for it too. And that market really collapsed when there's this underage sort of gambling debacle that happened in one of the a popular esport called CS:GO, Counter-Strike. And it sort of took that entire, like, although we weren't even doing the same thing or even in that space, like it just took the entire betting market in esports down because it was just unregulated, and rightfully so. And so I was really on like this hiatus. Like I was thinking about like, what should I do? Figuring stuff out. I was talking to venture funds that wanted me to join and be like their esports partner. I was talking to startups in the space, potentially joining, even some like agencies in LA who were looking to get into esports.
Was it you that concluded that, hey, this segment of the esports market is too hot, and I need to come off of it? Or was it investors saying like, hey, we perceive this as too risky?
No, we it was more so me. It was just like, look, this isn't going anywhere, right? Like I can spend my time doing something else, or I can spend my time doing this. But even if I do this, like it's not going anywhere. Some of the biggest companies in that space, Vulcan, they pivoted. They're now Streamlabs, Unicorn, which is doing fairly well now. They were struggling at the time, and no other companies were like doing well, right?
This
so
is more
just
you
the market
analyzing the market and like, hey, I got to cut my losses.
Yeah, the market was that, and that's what the market told me exactly. And so, I was fortunate enough to be able to be in a position where I could, just figure things out and had a bunch of options. And then I went to South by Southwest with my boy Marcus Carey, who runs Homage Hospitality, and he actually convinced me to go. I wasn't going to go. I was like, nah, I'm kind of chilling. I'm in Detroit at the time. And he's like, man, you got to get out here. Like, it's a bunch of people out here, a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces. And so I was like, all right, perfect. Right? I didn't have a place to stay or anything. Booked the flight. We got out there, just figured it out. And the very next day, we went to the Culture House ran by Rodney Williams, who runs Listener, who's at this point, like we talked obviously about investing in him early, but then over the years, him and I became pretty good friends. And he, him along with Ryan from Product Hunt, and I believe Susie, Troy, and Marlon from Cross Culture, they held this party, like this mansion party. It was a brunch, and basically everybody was there. It's like the who's who in tech and in business. And so, as I'm walking by on the dance floor, like I know all of the guys who were hosting it, but I didn't know Peter, a fan from Science. And so sort of as I'm walking by on this dance floor, Susie, who works with Troy Carter over at Cross Culture, she grabs me and it's like, hey, you should meet Peter. And I'm like, well, I know who Peter is. Obviously, he's a legend, right? He's raised $1 billion for startups since 2011. He's incredible. Everyone, like any investor, certainly on the coast, they know who he is.
Yeah.
And so he grabs me and she's like, yo, you should talk to Peter. And me and Peter are talking now. Mind you, this is a packed party. I'm on the first level of the party.
And you're not dancing. You're just walking around.
No one's dancing.
Yeah.
Peter's dancing.
Yeah.
Peter's the only person literally in this entire party dancing. People are just like, it's like a business event. So people are like talking, they're drinking, they're socializing. Peter is like legit, like, just the only person sort of like in this really tight space, just dancing and grinding. And I introduced myself. I'm like, hey, know who you are, big fan of what you do. We're talking. We talked for like 20 minutes. He doesn't stop dancing, by the way, which was awkward. Now I've come to know that's who he is. Yeah. And along the way, like in the conversation, he started talking about esports. I was like, hey, I just did something in esports. I'm really excited about that space, looking for something else ideally within that space. And he's like, I got an idea for you. And exchange contact. And the next day he hit me. He hit me via email actually the next day. But then he like called me and, conversation sort of just carried over a few months. And I came to LA from Detroit a few times, met with his other partners, Mike Jones, who was the CEO of MySpace. Another great CEO. I would very much liken him to Mark Cusson. He's one of my favorite CEOs. Tom Dare, who's another partner. He sits on our board now. He's from Detroit. Big fan of him. And Greg Gilman, who's also another partner. So there's 4 partners at Science: Peter, Mike, Greg, Tom. So got a chance to spend time with them, got a chance to spend time with a lot of the other entrepreneurs. And essentially they gave me the hard sell, like, hey, we want you to come do this. And the concept that they gave me was like, hey, we should pursue high school esports. Now, it was sort of stopped there. Like, they didn't say we should pursue high school esports and here's how we do it. They were like, we heard this is the thing. Like, you should do this, right? And I was like, it's pretty interesting because, like, my entire, like, what I wanted to pursue in esports in general was, like, competition and infrastructure. Yeah. Like, in the betting, like, even how we thought about betting within esports was, like, we're adding value to competitions. And so, I was pretty fascinated with it. Frankly, I didn't know much about the market. I knew that there should have been a market, but it didn't really exist for that demographic of players. And I really didn't know how to build the company. What I've come to know, by the way, that idea was really, to get back to your original question, was the concept was created by, I wouldn't say even created by him, but the idea to create like a venture-backed company to do this was actually, birthed from Matt Mazzio, who worked at Lowercase with Chris Sacca, one of the most, highest performing venture
very
funds of all time.
Track record, yeah.
Yep. And now he's over at Cotu, which I'm sure people know at this moment. I'm not even sure, to be honest with you. So if they don't, Mazio, I'm sorry. But Kotu is also an investor in us, which we're really excited about. But anyway, Matt Mazio came up with the idea. Apparently he told Peter and Mike. Peter and Mike really liked the idea. They told me, and then, they convinced me to move. I moved the last weekend in June, moved with a suitcase, gave everything away. Hadn't seen my place before. My boy, Matt Haig, who runs, his gamer tag is Nadeshot. He runs 100 Thieves, which is one of the biggest esports teams. Ironically, that Dan Gilbert is a big investor in, and he hooked me up with a place that's near his apartment, and I just moved, and I was like, all right, I'm going to give it a year, and if in a year this doesn't work, I'm going to do something else within or outside of esports, and if it does, then I'll keep doing it. And it's crazy. It was a year, July 1st, which is insane, and we've done so much in that time frame.
Yeah, so I want to highlight that when you meet one of your investors in Austin, that it's not like a random meeting, meaning that you already have social proof and endorsements from the community. You got other VCs, entrepreneurs vouching for you. So it's not like, a VC is randomly meeting you on the dance floor, that your character, your track record, your personality, whatever, it's already vouched for by the insiders kind of there. Yeah. And that opens the door.
Yeah, sure. That party was like an invite-only party anyway. Yeah. So the people in that room were based on the host, they thought should be in that room because they provide meaningful conversation. I was fortunate and privileged enough to be in that room, and had I not met Susie, I'm not here today. And so she was the person who connected us, and Peter gave me the hard sell. And there's a lot of people that are just involved in this, the origin of this company. And I'm sort of super thankful for all of them. And the best part for me is that now they're all investors in what we do, which is, definitely a full circle moment.
Yeah. And another thing I want to highlight is, I read an article, and one of your investors was quoted as saying that the most about esports than anyone that he has met. And so when I'm thinking about how your readiness and knowledge was ready for the luck in terms of that, the opportunity to connect with an investor, I'm thinking that your curiosity and reading so much about your industry, although it didn't work, it opened another door in terms of how much knowledge you had about your market.
Yeah, to be fair, I do know a lot about esports, but there are people who just know more than me.
Yeah, but the investor said just for him, you knew the most.
What I would say to him, I need to go back and find that, by the way, is that you don't know enough people in esports. Yeah. No, we have a bunch of people on our team who are far more knowledgeable on esports than me. And I studied the space. I talked to people in the space. I was prepared to build a company in the space, no matter what that company was, assuming I had passion for what it was. It was just the right timing, right place, right timing.
Can you explain to the audience what a traditional incubator does, and how that can really anchor you to kind of go out and raise money and develop your business model? Yeah,
so people generally confuse accelerators and incubators. I think they just consider them the same thing. An accelerator is, like a Y Combinator or Techstars, when a startup joins, generally for $120,000 investment for 6 or 7% of the company, and you're within this batch of maybe 100 other companies, and it really ranges. It could be a dozen to 100 companies, and it's for a 3-month period of time. You're just sort of heads down working on whatever you're working on, and at the end of it, there's this demo day in which a bunch of investors sort of from across the country come, and they may or may not decide to invest in your company. And obviously many other investor conversations sort of happen outside of that demo day, but that's sort of the culminating event of being an accelerator. Incubators are a little bit different. It's more of a complete partnership. And so, I joined Science. It was literally just me. And Science took a portion of our company, and they also gave us money, but in return, they gave me beyond money, things that I can't quantify, like a team. They gave me their team became my team, and every day, whatever staff they'd assigned in this pot to me was working only on my company every single day. They gave me support. It's tough. I moved from Detroit here to LA, and it's a lonely place trying to build a company when you don't have a co-founder, or you don't have team of your own, and they were there for me. They helped me model stuff out, as it comes to like numbers, to make sure like things made sense. They helped me do research. They helped me make connections. They represented our company. They traveled to places when I wasn't able to travel there, and like was a representative of our company and got stuff done. Yeah, they were just there. It was just like it's hard to describe unless you're in it, but the best way I would say is like they become your co-founders in a way, and not they as in like the partners, but like they as in the partners plus the other 30 or 40 people that work for them.
Yeah.
And also the other entrepreneurs that they've invested in. And so it's certainly, it's not for everyone. And frankly, some of the terms aren't, great for teams like large co-founded teams, or founded teams. But when you're one or two people, it totally makes sense unless you've, gone out and built the company and had some success that way.
Okay, got it. So they're on board, and you just raised a monster Series A round, $15 million, the most, are the largest Series A round by an African American consumer internet founder.
Yeah, I think it's the fourth largest ever.
Okay, fourth largest. Okay,
so it's the largest by an African American founder, consumer internet, or gaming, and fourth largest ever. I think, but it's interesting. They have another founder. I think his name is Kyle. I've only met him once. He runs a company called Harvey, which used to be called Home Hero. He raised $20 million. I think his is the third largest. It's a science company. So,
Okay, got it. So they're on board, but before you close out your round, do you have to go out and pitch like other entrepreneurs to other investors?
Yeah. Let me just walk through the journey of what we do and also sort of how that came about. So moved to LA, end of June, was in the office first week of July. At this time we hadn't really like incorporated the company or anything. We were just, still researching, figuring it out. So the first few months, all research, figuring it out. We hadn't started building yet. We hadn't even really figured out where we were going to build. But what we sort of boiled down to is that all of our key assumptions, which was like, should we be building a company in esports and focus on the high school demographic? And what we found is like, absolutely, yes, because high schoolers, teens are the most important demographic to publishers, to brands. And certainly if you're able to establish a relationship there with regard to teens from like a service or a product standpoint, like they tend to be, unless like they're obviously fickle at that age, but like if you could, get them to be loyal to you, then they tend to be like a fan of yours or a customer of yours forever. The other thing was that when you think about the impact that high school has had, like high school as a system has had on any other traditional sport, it's been a catalyst, right? Like for growth. And so we were like, if esports is going to grow, while it already has professional scenes that mirror the NFL and NBA, like these leagues, they don't understand or they don't know, they don't have a traditional funnel and like our feeder system established on how they're going to acquire their next group of superstars. And college was already budding. There's 200 plus colleges this year offering esports scholarships. The NCAA is exploring their involvement, and there's still no amateur scene. So no, youth scene, no high school scene, and certainly no even adult recreation scene. If you're a kid and you want to play esports today competitively, you just play, multiplayer modes with strangers or your friends, and you can play an ad hoc tournament, which lasts, a day or a half a day. But you can't play in like a season in a position, develop as a player, and there's no real life component to it. And so we validated that assumption. The other assumption we had was, so it was like the first assumption was just to go back, does it make sense to build a company in esports focused solely on, a high school demographic? It was a yes. And then the second was, well, if we're going to do high school, do we do this inside of high schools and if so, how? Or we do this outside of high schools, sort of grassroots and just, focus on like normal paid acquisition strategies to acquire customers. And what we found there was that if we did it outside of high schools, one that had been done before, but those groups were never really able to establish market share because they couldn't validate if these kids were in high school, which was a big issue to say you're a high school based company or primarily like you're focused on the high school demo. And the second thing was that it really didn't provide defensibility like as a business, right? Like because once the high school group high schools decided they wanted to do this, then like your company's dead. It was I would assume like the analogy I would use is like it was trying to build Pop Warner before high school football existed. Like it just wasn't possible. And so because the behavior even wasn't established. And so what ended up happening, which man, I'm super grateful for. We end up getting connected. So Danny Johnson, who's one of our investors, he is an SVP of marketing, I believe, at Paramount. He was at Fox prior, and he ended up connecting me to one of his friends who runs MTG. Like a division of MTG. I think he does all of their investments. MTG is Modern Times Group. They're a $20 billion Swedish media company. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in acquisitions in esports. They bought ESL, they bought DreamHack, which are like two of the largest companies in the space. And frankly, like those guys have been like pioneers of esports. And we had a conversation. We sort of built a report, and then he sort of down the road just randomly was like, "Hey, you should connect with the CEO of ESL." And he did an intro. Like I didn't ask for it or anything, wasn't expecting it. He just connected me. And I spent time talking with Craig, who's the CEO, and he's like, "Hey, like, you should talk to these other guys doing something, looking at, like," he's like, "just looking at high school esports. I don't really know what they do, but you should talk to them. I'll connect you." And I was like, all right, great. Right. And at this time, by the way, like morale wasn't super high around science of like building this company, because we're in like September and like we haven't figured it out. And like we felt like we gotten close, like we knew what we had to do, but like, distribution to the schools was like impossible. Like, are we going to go to every single school and try to like sign them up? Like that process is so painful. And so, anyway, Craig connects me to the NFHS, and I don't know if he knew it was the NFHS, or if I don't know if he was just passing the boat, like getting him off of his desk, or if he was like genuinely trying to help us.
The full name of the organization?
Yeah, National Federation of State High School Associations. So the NFHS has existed since 1920. They're effectively the NCAA of high school. They decide what sports should be played in high school, what activities there should be competitions for in high school. And so they were basically the group who decided that football should be a sport in high school, and then downstreamed it into every high school. Basketball should be a sport in high school, downstreamed into every high school. Even things like debate and drama and music. And they're actually in the NCAA's office. So them and the NCAA operate parallel, and they share an office in Indianapolis. And basically, like, they control high school sports, right? And so he connects us to them. They're already at this point talking to 5 other companies in the space about introducing esports within their 20,000 high schools, which is every high school in the country that offers sports. And I'm one man show, sort of last at the party, competing with all of these massive tens of billion dollar companies. It was definitely intimidating, but I was excited. I was like, this is literally, if you're going to get into high schools to do anything, this is especially as a sport, right? Like, this is the only company you have to talk to, because it's the only company you can talk to. They decide what sports are played in high school, and they can just control the entire boat for it. And so, and it was a super ambitious ask for me too, right? Because like 99 years, like that's how long they've existed. They've never partnered with a company to turnkey a sport. They've never said, "Hey,
we're gonna use your platform."
Everything is internal. Like, they operate their own sports. Yeah. It's like, imagine if one company owned all of high school football. And so I talked to them first time. Conversation was great. Good intro call. And they weren't like overly like excited to try to make it work, because they were already talking to a bunch of people. But what I did was, I was like, well, what are you guys struggling with in esports? Like, understanding the concept. What do you want to learn? Right. And they told me, and so I sort of scheduled all of these sort of back-to-back calls, and we just were like talking about stuff that they wanted to learn. And, that conversation allowed me to build rapport with them, and we bonded. And I would like to say that we sort of established a friendship and obviously a lot of trust, but like it didn't progress in terms of like them working with us. It was more like I was just educating them. And
would you say that that's just a sales skill that you develop in terms of you're probing, how can I help?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, no, for sure. 100%. Without working at the cell phone stores and being a part of that, like I don't even understand how to do that.
Yeah.
In terms of like, how do you develop a funnel? And so like a month in, let's call it, we've had a few conversations. And at this point, like, my back's against the wall. We need to get something built because we know the next school year is starting. And so I'm like, hey, look, I'm going to come out to Atlanta, which is where they have a for-profit, their for-profit arm is, and I'm going to show you guys what we've built. By the way, it's just me. We haven't built anything. And like, you know, I had the foresight to be like, let's set the meeting. It's like early October, probably like the 1st of October, let's call it. And I'm like, let's set the meeting in November. Like, it's so like the first week of November. I think it'll be like the 7th or something like that. And because I needed that time to go and build something and even prepare. Like, I hadn't even thought about it. I just was like, I need to do this. And like, you know, this gives me enough time. And so they were like, all right, cool. That works out perfectly for us. And like, my fear was like, okay, within this time frame, hopefully they don't make a decision on who to work with. Cause I know that they've been talking to 5 people, but I'm like, now I have a month to like, just put something together and blow them away. And so anyway, within that time frame, Sean, who's now our head of product, is a good friend of mine. He's from Detroit, but he was already living in LA. Phenomenal engineer, also designer. And then Dalvit, who's our CTO, is a good friend of mine. I met from DeAndre, who I work with at Rocket Fiber. And he's like one of the best engineers that I've ever met. And so I reached out to them. It was like, hey, not even to join PlayVS. Hey, can you help me build something? I wireframed exactly what I wanted to build, which was like a simple platform. And I wanted to simulate it to show exactly how esports, like to include in my presentation to show how esports could be played in high school, because it can't be played in like the physical world. Like, you can't have one team. I guess like it's obviously a physical element, like an in real life element, but it can't be like the games have to be played through software. So you need a platform in which connects to the game client to be able to play the games, right? Even if like kids are meeting up together, going and playing in their computer lab, like they wouldn't travel from school to school. So like school A wouldn't travel to school B to play the games. It needed to be played through software. And so we needed to build software that simulated that. And so I wireframed it up using like Balsamic or some tool like that, and showed it to these guys, spec'd out how I wanted to functionally look. And they were like, all right, cool, we'll help you build it. And they did. And we did it in like 2 or 3 weeks, and we polished it. And then I prepared like all of my presentation documents, and me and Peter, we went out to Atlanta to pitch them. It was like, it's supposed to be like an hour, maybe 45-minute hour meeting. And it went like 3 hours. And so I knew that was a good sign. And one of the things that I think stuck out the most there is that because the meeting started off really intense, just one of the guys, Robert, he was like, so look, we've already talking to 5 other groups. What can you guys do for us? That's literally how he started it. So I'm like, whoa. I don't know. Like, what if they said they could do for you, right? I wasn't prepared for that. And so anyway, like we have a really good conversation, a lot of interesting stuff. They were playing. They never really told us. Like, you couldn't tell if they liked us or not. And one of the things, like, they ended the meeting even after 3 hours. Like, look, we think we're going to make, like, you know how the school system is. Like, it's slow. Like, I think we're going to make a decision in like a year, right? Yeah. And I'm like, we might as well pack our bags up and go do something else. You don't got
a year.
But on our way out, they have a really beautiful office, and on our way out, there was this ping pong table, and I'd ask them like, "Oh, you guys play ping pong?" Because they had like a little like a score, like they had the scores up on the whiteboard. And they're like, "Yeah," and Robert, the same guy who sort of started the meeting that way, he's like, "Yeah, I'm the champ or whatever around here." Whatever. And so we end up leaving. I just took that nugget. We end up leaving, and literally in our Uber on the way back to the airport, I ordered him this massive, obnoxious like ping pong trophy, and it said like the man, the myth, the legend, and it got mailed to him. Yeah. And so I mailed this trophy over to him, and like they get it in like, it was like a 10-day order, so they get it in like 10 days or whatever. And it's crazy how just God works, man, because that's like the same day they got it. They didn't know that they didn't have it yet, but like the same day they end up calling me like early in the morning, like, hey, no, we said we were going to make a decision in a year, but what we want to do is partner with you exclusively to introduce esports into high school. And here's what that means for us, right? So we're going back and forth. We negotiate terms, just baseline terms. And then later in the day, they were like, Robert called me. He's like, hey, man, I got the trophy you sent. It was just another reason, sort of validation for them. Like, this is why we should be working with these guys. And yeah, it was just great. It was great.
If you really love the Go podcast, one way to support us is going to moguldom.com, moguldom.com/survey. Fill out that quick survey. That gives us better information on our audience. It helps us with our sponsors. That's one big way you can support us and keep our movement going. Go to moguldom.com/survey. Thank you.
And I mean, we negotiated the terms, just like the principal terms, but then there was like another month and a half of not only diligence from them, but further negotiation on those terms. And what we end up getting is like this exclusive, like indefinite agreement to operate esports turnkey for the NFHS and their membership, which is 20,000 schools across every state, including DC. And it was like incredible. One, it's like groundbreaking. It was scary because all of the other 5 companies found out that they were talking to us, and they're like offering them buku dollars. And I'm like our whole thing sort of, we would have found a way to do it either way, but like if someone else would have gotten this, like this is like everything. It's like it's what you need. And so, anyway, they set a date for us to come out and pitch to their board in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it was like the first 3 days inside of the new year, and we went and pitched to their board. And it was the craziest feeling. Me, Laz, who is our VP of BD, and another guy named James who worked for Science. And by the way, at the time, Laz, again, it was still me on the team, but Laz worked at Science. And the irony there, or at least I guess like how this story is so circular, man, because like Laz worked for Matt Mazzio. He worked at Lowercase on their investment team. It was only 4 people on that team. And before he worked there, he was hired to build this company. So Lowercase with Matt Mazzio, they were going to incubate a high school esports company to build what we're building. And but like Laz, like he kind of fell in love with like just investing in startups, and so he just did that because that's sort of what was on their plate. And then when like the whole Lowercase stuff blew up because Sokka retired, Laz was looking for something to do, and him and I had talked because of the betting company. I pitched to him to invest, and Lowercase didn't do betting company, so they rejected me. But me and him just built the relationship, which is a lesson in itself. Like entrepreneurs, like if you're talking to an investor, first off, it's hard for entrepreneurs and investors to build real relationships because there's always an ask at the other end. But if you get over that hump and like you're talking to an investor and they reject you, sometimes it's not because like they're rejecting you, it's because like their LPs don't like that sector of business, or like they've already done a competitive deal, or even if it is because they don't like what you're doing, like that doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with them. Had I not had that relationship with Laz, even after they rejected me, Laz doesn't get the job at Science, and then Science, doesn't hire Laz to like come to close this deal with me, and I don't get this deal maybe.
Yeah, because I could see some immature entrepreneurs, they're getting mad because they were rejected. Why they reject me? And
it's not an emotional thing. Like it's like it's emotional to be rejected, certainly, right? Like,
but would you say that a lot of
a
some entrepreneurs are soft in the sense that you get a rejection by an investor.
Yeah,
you take it very personal, right? It's an
emotional.
That's what I mean. It's
not
thing.
Personal.
But with you though, you're not a Cosby kid, meaning that you're coming from the bottom in Detroit, and where your experience is, what you say, that has hardened you. Where if you get a no, that's not a lot.
No.
That's not a big deal. It's just a no.
Yeah. Look, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And also it's like, okay, cool. Like you have a job to do, and a part of that job was telling me no, but that doesn't mean that me and you have to be at ends. And so that's just been and even before, right? Like we told Brian Brakeem from Kairos no when like I worked at Inkwell, and it wasn't because I didn't like Kairos as a business. It's because my partner said no, and me and Brian still developed a relationship, and that's how you and I got connected. And so it goes. And so I think entrepreneurs, it's just a lesson. Like don't take it personal. Like just because an investor tells you no doesn't mean they don't like you. It may mean they don't like your business, but like that shouldn't prohibit you from starting a friendship, in a relationship more than anything. And so anyway, look, Laz works at Science, and he goes out there with me. Laz, James, who works at Science, and then myself, and we're in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we go and we pitch the NFHS board. And this is the first time I've ever been in like a boardroom where it's packed, right? It's like all of these executive directors who run these states, and they sort of have to make a decision in consensus to like let us be their partner, right, versus everyone else. And it was pretty intense actually because even our emotions were just running high because we were supposed to pitch at one time, but then their meeting started going over, and so we had to wait outside of their boardroom for like 4 hours to even pitch. We then go in and we pitch, and like we hadn't ate, we couldn't eat, we couldn't drink, we were just like anxious, right? We go in and we pitch, and we're feeling like initially it starts off pretty, just rocky but good. It stabilizes, and then like we start getting a crap load of questions. It's me, Laz, and James. We're both fielding questions from like 5, 6, 7 people at a time. So it's like Laz is on one side of the room talking, I'm on this side of the room talking, James is, and we're going to go like back to back on questions. And then that was it. They were like, all right, cool, we'll be in touch in an hour. And then an hour went by, then another hour went by, then like 7 hours go by, right? Yeah. And we're like, like we're not going to get this. Like that. Yeah. James, he brought his family, so he was like spending time with his family because he just had a son. And me and Laz were just sitting at this fire pit, like, man, we just blew it, And then they called us and they were like, hey, we got the word, we're gonna like come down to see you guys. And like it was like 30 minutes, but it ended up being like 45 minutes or so. And so we're like really anxious now. And eventually they get down there. And then they're hitting us with small talk because like it's 3 people who's supposed to come down, but like they're coming down one at a time. And so like the first one comes, and then another 15 minutes, the next one comes, then another 15 minutes. So it's like this massive buildup, and we're doing all of this small talk, and it definitely didn't like feel good. And they sit down, they're like, all right, so one, we're excited to do this, right? Which is like amazing. Then they're like, but we got one hang up, and I can't disclose what the hang up was, but it was great. It was like, it was more favorable to us. Yeah. And they were like, we were really arguing in there for like whatever amount of like couple hours, not because we didn't want to do it, but because of this hang up, which was like incredible for us. And that was it. And they were like, all right, let's get it signed. And we got it signed like that day, that night. And it was super late at night, by the way. It was like literally like the next morning. And that was it, and like we just got to work from there. And so then I hired Dalvid, who's now our CTO. Immediately hired Sean, who's now our head of product. And they brought in some guys. We ended up being 5 people. We went from starting January after 6 months just with me, and then closing the deal, and then into January we were 5 people, and now we're grown. We've grown a lot since then.
Okay, got it. So how do you fill out your round after this?
We don't initially go raise a round. It's funny though, that day it was an investor who's invested in a for-profit in NFHS. He comes up to us. He's like, look, really love what you guys are doing. I like to lead your round whenever you do go out and raise it. He offers us like $8 million or something crazy like that. Literally like first day we met him, and we were like, like we're not raising right now, but like let's stay in touch, let's figure it out right at a later date. And we go back and we mostly just focus on like building a team, fleshing out what we're building, spending time with the states, because we need to learn at this point like how high school sports work, because like this is a 100-year-old history and tradition to like how they do things. And so we need to spend time just learning how they do things so we can best adjust for the system. And so the next 3 or 4 months were like just that, like spending time with the states, spending time with the NFHS, building rapport, and fleshing out what we were doing. And what happened is we started getting investors just dropping by. Like, because we go out and we partner to introduce esports into high schools. We're partnering, like we own the distribution. No one else can do this, like what we're doing. We're the only ones. Yeah. But we have to go out and partner with publishers to get their IP, right? Like how Spotify goes and partners with record labels to get, the music content. Yeah. And so publishers start to talk. They're like, oh, you heard of these guys? And we're not public, by the way, at this time. No one knows we exist. We're super quiet. I don't even think I was tweeting at this time, like for a few months. And
as it relates to you, can you explain to the audience a name of a publisher in terms of how you're thinking about it with esports?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a bunch of games that I would consider esports. There's dozens, but the biggest game is League of Legends by Riot Games, which is owned by Tencent. There's others like NBA 2K, which is owned by Take-Two, which the NBA actually has an esports league for, and Overwatch by Blizzard. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And so, and generally, what esports means at like the highest level is like, it's a term to define competitive gaming. So people are playing in these competitive contests similar to sports across different video games in a team-based setting. So one team versus another team, with the outcome and objective being securing a win. Right, it's no different than one basketball team playing another, with doing a bunch of sort of things in between to secure a win. Exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so Yeah, and by the way, a lot of these publishers were like our competitors and like securing a deal, right? So like these publishers were out to get that deal with the NFHS themselves, and so
What about EA Sports? Were they in the mix?
I can't disclose that, but like, it's the interesting thing is like, imagine us securing it, right? And they know I'm just one person, and the first month or so with publishers was rough because they were pissed, they were like, how did this guy go out and get this deal? And like one publisher, like restructured their entire team that was focused on high school, like blew it up. Yeah. And I was like, wow. Like that's how I knew we had impact, right? Immediately I was like, oh, this is going to work. Like we just got to stay heads down and get through it. Like, but this is inevitable. But anyway, we spent all of that time, figuring out what we're going to do. And then, before, like when we knew it was time to raise, it was when like investors start just dropping by, like, hey, we heard about you guys, like dropping by our office, right? Hey, we heard about you guys. We should talk, right? Like we sit there and talk for 20, 30 minutes, they'd be like, all right, cool. Come up, meet with our partners. We want to make an investment, stuff like that. And we at that time, like a lot of it, we're like, nah, we're good, but it's good to like meet with you and like establish a rapport. Then we're really focused on just announcing what we're doing. And so we announced the company, and this is like in April when all of this started happening. And then we announced the company April 19th. And like it kind of like shook esports, like it turned the entire esports world upside down. Like video games as an actual varsity sanctioned high school sport where kids can win a state championship just like their peers in basketball and football. Like people couldn't believe it. So investors obviously start flocking there. And then we went out, we put a pitch deck together, a very light deck actually, and we started raising. And the first investor we talked to said no. It was a video chat. And I remember it was a really big investor too. And I don't want to disclose the fund, but it's like this massive investor, deep ties in, Asia and China startups, but a lot of consumer companies, and himself, he's just like the main partner. And frankly, I think he was a little distracted because he was like heading to the airport, and he's like, I got to go to the airport in like 20 minutes or something like that. So it's like, basically like, let's make a quick thing. And then like I'm talking and I can tell he's not really like paying attention. And then at the end of it, he's like, you know what, man, I don't know if this is venture backable, that sort of thing, and I'm like, what? Like how? Like explain to me. And I didn't take offense to it. I'm just like, explain to me, right? Because like we're using software. He's like, in the same vein, like the NBA wouldn't be venture backable. This isn't. And I'm like, dude, we're capturing, if we can capture, we own exclusive distribution to every high school in the country, which means we can target high school students for any product, but let alone like what we're doing for gaming in their most native community, which is high school. That's when they spend most of their time throughout the year and throughout the 4 years they're in high school. I'm like, if we can capture their attention, like we can extract enormous value from it. And and obviously we're building like this incredible software that like does all of these things that no one has ever done in competition platforms in esports. And he's like, this is not venture backable, but all right, man, I'll talk to you, like that sort of thing. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, no doubt. The next day, that was like a Thursday. The next day we fly up to San Francisco and we pitch a few funds, and few of them literally that day, NEA included, were like we're sitting in the NEA meeting who led our round, and they're like, and we just left one of the funds that was next door to them. And because, all of these funds are just next door to each other, like no matter where they're at in Sand Hill or in San Francisco. And so, NEA, like John Sakota is sitting there. He was one of the main partners there. He just left. And Rick Yang, who sits on our board, and he's like, we should invest in this. He's like, he looks at Rick. He's like, no, I'm serious. Like we should write you guys a check. And Peter's like, he's like, how much are you guys raising? And Peter's like, just name your price, that sort of thing. And he's like, I'll give you guys 20 million, like that sort of thing. And like, it's just like, I was like, like that's insane or whatever. But anyway, we end that meeting. They're like, all right, come up next week. And we already have a bunch of partners meeting. So how it works is like you meet with a venture fund. Typically you meet with a venture fund, like the first meeting. And sometimes there's a couple meetings before you get to the stage. In our case, it was like we met with most of the venture funds we talked to, and then we come right back up for the partners meeting, right? Which is Monday. And that's like when they typically make a decision if they're going to invest or not. And you kind of know quickly. And then at some point, like they'll either have a couple conversations with you or just issue a term sheet and you kind of go from there. Then we met with a couple venture funds on Friday. 2 of those venture funds wanted to offer us, came back up to the partners meetings. Things really progressed very fast in that first 3 days. And then, we ended up doing a few more meetings, like I think two or three more days of meetings. And we ended up getting like 6 or 7 term sheets. And what we ended up doing is like how we filtered through the term sheets was like, one, I started spending time with like the investors. So like when someone's going to give you 10, 15, $20 million, like they don't just like, it doesn't like those meetings are it. So like you'll fly back up just to meet with these guys, like to do dinner, right? To like, cause they're like, we need to get to know you just as much as you need to get to know them. Right. And a lot of it was like, and beyond anything, like we were getting pitched. So we were like, people were taking us to games. They were like flying down, doing dinner with me. They were sending me stuff. They were, like, it was just crazy. They were putting decks together and, like, giving me a full court press on why I should be working with them. It was unbelievable. It was, like, legit, like, they were organized dinners with, like, their most successful founders. And, like, and a lot of these guys, you go around, like, I'm thinking, like, this guy sold his company for $3 billion, this guy $1 billion, this guy, like, insane. Yeah. They were, like, organizing, like, NBA owners to, like, take us to games and stuff like that. It was like the owner, like, go meet the owner here. He's going to drive you or fly you into the game. Like, that sort of stuff. It was crazy. I was like, oh, that's how the other side raises. And so anyway, very quickly, it was like basically 2 weeks, and we decided to go with NEA, and we ended up negotiating how much we were going to raise. We decided we could have done like 25, 30. We decided that we were going to do 15. NEA put in their check, which was 10. And then that's when the real work came. It wasn't even like finding the lead. It was like all of the other people. And so we had like $20 or $30 million easily, just from not even including the term sheets, which I wouldn't include there because you can only have one lead, from just like participants. Like maybe more, it was probably 30 plus, from like people who were like, I want to put in 2 million, I want to put in 4 million, I want to put in 1 million. Like it's like even I want to put in the 50,000s. Like those. Yeah, guys,
once you have the lead, everybody kind
before we had the lead though, all of these guys were in. But like when we had the lead, it was like that's when they were like they started dropping by the office and like, let's figure this out. We want to be in. What I'll tell you is you lose a lot of friendships in that process. There were guys that I'd known before from my time in venture that we couldn't make work. Like they just were like they won't. I couldn't call them the day they wouldn't pick up the phone.
Like, come on, brother.
Because we didn't let them in, and some of it was like the numbers don't work, right? Like we get NEA at 10, then we got like Science has to invest again, right? They have pro rata, so like they're at 2, and frankly, like they could invest more, but they're at 2. It could have been just NEA and Science, right? Like they're at 2. Then you have like the NFHS who wanted to invest. Like how can we say no to them, right? And then like it's all of these groups, right? Like that want to get in, and basically so you got like this $3 million pie that you're trying to fit all of the most interesting people in or funds to like into that slice of like available money, and it's just hard, It's like we had so many guys like. The biggest athletes in the world, the biggest musicians in the world, some of the biggest people who've impacted culture who wanted to write us checks. And it wasn't that I didn't want them in. It was just like the numbers don't work.
And so we talked about entrepreneurs being too emotional on the no. You're talking about VCs where you had to shut the door for practical reasons, structural reasons, but you're saying that they were kind of, taking it personally.
Man, if you know the stuff we went through on just people who couldn't get in and what the extremes they've gone, you'd be blown away. Off the record, I'll tell you folks.
If you like what you're hearing, you could check us out at Moguldom.com. That's Moguldom.com. That's Moguldom.com. We have the latest information on tech, crypto, the business of Hollywood, and economic empowerment. You can also check me out on Twitter at Jamarlin Martin. Let's get back to the podcast. So a little bit about Delane. So he was introduced to me by another founder, Brian Brackeen, in Miami a couple of years ago. And before, this monster raise, I was told like, man, this guy Delane, you got to meet this guy. This guy has more energy, a more kind of drive than anybody out there. That you had already acquired a reputation in the community, in the tech community, that this guy is an entrepreneur of entrepreneurs. And so just want to highlight that a lot of folks already knew where you were headed. Before you had it figured out, you had such a kind of high reputation that kind of folks knew that you were the entrepreneur of entrepreneurs.
I'm blessed to hear that. By the way, shout out to Brian Burkeen, man. He used to let me come and stay at his house in Miami. He ended up giving me a key. I stayed there, man, at least, I like to say 100 days, 1 year. I just come down, stay at his house. Half of the time, he wasn't even at his house, so it was like my little castle. I had a bedroom in his house. He was a big part of the journey.
One thing that's one of many things I would say that makes you unique is that you go to Sand Hill Road and you're connecting with all these kind of big shots in the tech game, in the esports game, in the VC game. However, you're still very visible in the black tech community. When you announced your raise, you talked about this is for, a lot of the ancestors. And it's kind of like you're moving, your drive, you got the people, I'm talking about black people specifically, on your back. And a lot of times when folks start getting into these elite crowds, it's kind of like, there's a detachment. Can you talk about kind of how you're able to balance it and you're still repping the community while you're doing big things?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And this even goes back to the raise too, which I'm sure someone want to tell the story at some point. We had all of these term sheets on the table, and one of the things that I was very vocal about beyond the terms itself was that obviously we were going to have this board structure, and like one person's going to get a seat from the fund that leads our round, and science is going to get a seat. I hold 2 seats, and there's going to be an independent. And I wrote into like the term sheet. It's like, look, I won't sign a term sheet from any fund for 2 reasons. One, like our independent, like my 2 terms were like, our independent had to be a woman. Like no matter what, like it had to be a woman, and you had to be okay with that, and like you had to be able to write that in, and like NEA was obviously okay with that. That was a big, like they were happy about it. They were happy to do so. And the other thing was that we turned down a bunch of funds. We turned down a bunch of funds who wanted to issue term sheets, but like just because like they didn't have black founders in their portfolio. For me, it just meant more about working with a fund who does already support black people. Like for me, I was like, I don't want to be the first. I want to be with my people, right? And also you learn something in that process too. It would be like investors will like take you out to dinner and stuff, and the type of restaurants they would take you to. And I'd be like, what is this, bro? Like, there's no black people in the restaurant. The only black people is to help people, and it's like this doesn't feel like home to me. Yeah, and like
and you're thinking like. Obviously, you're thinking about the upside, but you're thinking about the downside. In a lot of cases, you're battling with your investor, right?
If I, and obviously this is pressure in general, but like if I'm fighting for black people while from like the investor that I want to take, but then like during the downturns in our company, like it doesn't go well, or the investor's not happy, then they totally don't work with any more black people, right? Because they pattern match, so they equate me not succeeding to like support other black people to like other black people may not succeed. And so what NEA was a little bit different than other like tier 1 venture funds we talked to, was that like they'd already supported black people and not talked to all of their black founders. A few of them, not all of them, they have a bunch. And I talked to the ones who like specifically went through like rough patches, and they were like, NEA was there for us. They were like, they would do anything for us. There were even rounds, like the next round, NEA didn't lead, but they participated, and they wanted to lead, but we chose someone else, but they were still there for us. And that's like a character trait that entrepreneurs need to like make sure exists within the investor that they take. Like an investor who doesn't care about like the color of your skin or the background you come from, who cares about you as a person, beyond even you as an entrepreneur, is super important.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway in terms of you were strong enough to be very selective when you had, these options. But what I was going to say is that why it's so important that you properly vet the investor, right? It's easy to see dollar signs, but you don't want to be that entrepreneur like the locks in terms of, you see folks dangling the money, but you got to think about your company's going to have a rough patch, right?
Yeah. It's expected.
Yeah. So there's going to be problems. And so in a lot of cases, you're going to be battling with the investor, right? Who's going to be on the other side?
Who's going to be on your board? Yeah.
By the way, who's going to push me out faster when I don't hit the numbers?
Yeah. By the way, too, don't really worry about that, because like, look, I think what entrepreneurs fail to realize is like, look, your board works for you. It's not the other way around. Like they're there to serve you, and if they're not doing that, then like you go talk to whomever you need to do and like make an adjustment there. But yeah, certainly, like obviously that was of consideration to me. It's like, who am I going to spend the most time with? And I want someone who understands where I come from and like and is okay with that. And not just that one person, but like the group, right? Because like investors, especially at funds, like they face social pressure from like their peers. And, you know, I didn't want to be in a place where there wasn't a lot of black people who walked through those doors or like were a part of that community. And to some degree, like some people do want to be the first. But I care more about, I feel like I'm going to be successful. I want to make money for people who are going to then disperse some of that money back to my communities. And that's why I chose NEA. And they had black people on their staff. That was a whole nother thing. Yeah. Like
they had everything working.
Yeah, they're like they had black people on the staff. You know, like it's like you going to like man. Yeah. Anyway.
So the Silicon Valley critic Vivek Wadhwa, some years ago, he studied Silicon Valley and he said Indians, East Indians, they were able to break through. One, they formed organizations with one of the organizations going over 1,000 members in terms of their networking, their mentoring, they're helping each other. He said when he looked at the black tech space, he said, you guys don't help each other.
That's not true.
Hold on, let me finish.
Who is this guy?
Vivek Wadhwa. So he was an entrepreneur and then he went into academia, but he's been one of the...
he doesn't have a lot of black friends.
Yeah, and at this time, though, this was around, to be fair, it's about 2012, 2013.
Doesn't matter. He doesn't have enough black friends.
Okay, so you feel like that's totally unfair.
Dude, when we announced our raise, one of the first messages I got was from Tristan Walker, whom I'd never met before. Obviously, I've looked up to. He sent me a message and was just like, yo, I'm proud of you. Like, you don't need me to be proud of you, but I'm proud of you. Like, I see you. Like, keep moving. Like, just a lot of words of encouragement.
Well, not necessarily encouragement or support, but I guess what he's talking about
introductions.
Is pulling.
Look,
pulling other people
I'll give you another example. Look, when we pitched Andreessen, and you know they didn't do anything in gaming, so it just didn't really make sense. But Chris Lyons was like, you know, like, what do you need me to do? I'll politic it inside. Like, we'll make this happen. Like, support Brian Burkeen when I needed to spend time in Miami and to figure out, you know, what we were doing and meet people there. Brian Burkeen opened his doors to me.
Yeah,
you
so
know,
you
let me live in his, like Marcus Carey. When we were putting together our financial models, we would send them to Marcus Carey and he reconstruct the entire financial model. He's building his own company, but he's spending a week, 2 weeks working on our stuff to make sure that we're ready to go out and raise. Like, there's a bunch, like, man, I've had way too many black entrepreneurs show support to me, you know, help push me, help take a bet on me, make connections for me, leverage their name to help get me in the door. For some clown like this guy to, like, you know, say that like black people don't help each other enough. There's communities, by the way, for black entrepreneurs. There's like stuff that like Richard Kirby and Charles Hudson have done, like Stealth Mode, where, you know, people share jobs. There's Angela with New Me. There's Hodge Flemings in Detroit who does nothing but, you know, try to help black entrepreneurs, especially even from like not even in tech, but like small businesses. He partnered with WordPress to help black entrepreneurs build websites all across the country. There's like, I think this guy obviously hasn't been necessarily exposed to it, and maybe he doesn't understand systematic oppression, but like, you know, we're helping each other, you know. And so,
you know, you've studied the tech game extensively and you've met a lot of people. Is there anything where our people, African Americans, we're late to the party in terms of the tech game, relatively speaking, right? We're getting into the game just now. Is there something that you feel like the black entrepreneurs that you come in contact with, there's something specific with the black entrepreneurs I meet where they struggle with specific things, and kind of there's some specific areas related to this late party to the game where we need to step it up?
I don't want to, you know, I don't even want to add any sort of weight to like any sort of criticism other people give, you know, black entrepreneurs. I think the things that we struggle with, all entrepreneurs struggle with. And, you know, it's some of that for us is not because like, you know, we just struggle with it. It's because we weren't exposed to it. We don't have resources there. Obviously, raising money is a very difficult experience for black entrepreneurs, even harder for black women. You know, being able to get deals done sometimes, even when it makes sense and it's the right deal for a company to do, is hard. Our brand to do is hard for black entrepreneurs. But But look, I think, we have to continue to just work together, band together, and work hard at like whatever we're doing and like support each other in that process. And I think, this community of Black entrepreneurs, especially in today's time, like that's what, I've noticed we've all done. And I'm happy that there are more entrepreneurs like investors, entrepreneurs turned investors and investors like yourself who support, Black entrepreneurship and, are there to sort of push down doors for Black entrepreneurs to walk through them. And so what I will say is that there's been a bunch of times where Black entrepreneurs have been early to the party and haven't gotten credit for it. You look at what Deshaun has done with Maven and in the Black beauty space, in the beauty space in general, but even in the Black beauty space, turning stylists into like creating new revenue lines for stylists to be able to sell, weave extensions and even additional beauty products, and how massive that company has gotten, and not enough people talk about it. When you look at Michael McGee and Neil Silas Griffin, who literally started there was this moment in time where there was this big wave around ed tech startups, specifically startups that were teaching people how to code in 3 or 4 months. Like that wasn't started by General Assembly. That was started by Code Academy, which became Starter League because the YC startup Code Academy took their name. And so they had to change their name to Starter League in Chicago by 2 Black guys that went to Northwestern. They were the first company that ever started a program to teach people how to code in 3 months. And they were doing Ruby on Rails. And they didn't even know how to code themselves, but they ended up finding an instructor. They got an incredible story. They went finding an instructor, getting that person to build curriculum the first 3 months, and then they put up a website, got like 70 people to pay them $8,000 or something like that up front to like build this school to teach people how to code. And they were in the classes themselves for the first 3 months, learning themselves, and over time that company continued to grow. And Jason Fried and the 37 Signals now Basecamp team who created Ruby on Rails, they invested in these guys, which was like their first outside investment, and they grew an entire ecosystem, and they don't get credit for it. Like people give General Assembly credit, and they give Dev Bootcamp and all of Hack Reactor, all of these guys credit for like creating that ed tech movement around teaching people how to code. But those was 2 Black kids in Chicago.
In terms of building up wealth in our community, would you be open on your next round where there's some type of vehicle that would allow smaller investors to acquire equity under, let's say, a Reg CF, where the vehicle could actually distribute shares or sell shares to non-accredited investors, where we can push some of the equity down from kind of more exclusive communities where our people can, just acquire shares under, of course, SEC regulations.
Yeah. So, obviously I can't commit to that today.
Yeah,
because
but
that's
you would be
more of a
open
board
to
decision.
considering
Yeah,
that.
I think we'd be down to consider it. And I don't know if, it makes sense for considering what the valuation of that round will probably be for super small investors. But like, we're obviously always down to help and to, explore ways to make more money for Black people, our people. So yeah, I'm totally
I'm
down
gonna follow up with you on that. Special thanks to Delane. Where can people check you out on Twitter, and then also your company's domain?
Yeah, so I'm just at Delane, at DELANE on Twitter, and playversus.com, POAYVS.com. Thank you, by the way.
Let's go. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Go. You can check me out at Jamarlin Martin on Twitter, and also come check us out at Moguldom.com. That's MOGULDOM.com. Be sure to subscribe to our daily newsletter. You can get the latest information on crypto, tech, economic empowerment, and politics. Let's go.